Hi again. We're going to look at a 416 Rigby rifle made by Rigby, and I have a hunch there are a lot of videos out there, although I didn't check. But I mean, they are an astonishing rifle, and I'm sure the people who own them like to share them. I thought I'll show you this 416, but I'll also show it in the context of other Mausers. Just sort of on an educational basis, I've got a Type C Mauser, which is less common, and that's in 30-06. And then I've got a lovely little Kurz original Mauser, and this is in 300 Savage, actually. Not a very common rifle. You can see how small it is. But before I get into the Rigby, I thought maybe I'll just sort of describe for people who turn on the channel for whatever reason. You know, there's a high end to all consumer products. For some reason, Rolex watches come to mind, but that's not the only high-end watch. And of course, with cars, Ferrari, and there's a high end for everything. In firearms, I don't know that Rigby is the very top of the pile. I don't think there is a very top, but it's nice to have owned a Rigby. I've had several. This is the only 416 of new manufacture that I've owned. There were older models. A lot of them had worn bores because they used cordite back in those days when these were used as tools. And the cordite being a type of gunpowder that sometimes causes corrosion. Anyway, this is a new one. Rigby turns these out. You could probably buy one, although right now they're very hard to come by. You know, it's like any other high-end product. There just aren't that many made. It's built on a Magnum Mauser action. So even if this looks familiar, this is substantially bigger than a regular Mauser 98. And there are those of you that are more advanced collectors than I am, and maybe you have a Brevex Mauser. I think Brevex was made in France. That was a big action. This is made in Germany. I don't know exactly where. It's a double square bridge. So, and they make two, or they did make two when I bought this rifle. So square bridge simply means that this is squared off and that's squared off, which has a certain aesthetic appeal and makes the mounting of scopes easier. So the bases are actually in the square bridges in this case. And of course the rifle came with these quick detachable scope rings. I think they're German as well. They look like turn-in rings, and in a way they are, except that you can unlock them easily and they return to zero and they work beautifully. So, I mean, people often say, well, what do you get when you buy a Rolex? Of course, a Rolex can't really tell time any better than time itself. And there are watches for probably $20 that are just as accurate. Not quite so with the Rigby. The big action makes it easier to accommodate the large cartridge, and that's the Rigby there next to the 30-06. I put that for comparison. That's just, if it looks odd to you, that's because it's a steel case. I actually like that ammunition. It's not very expensive and is high quality. Next to the Rigby is the 458 lot. And this one, I was going through the ammo vault. That's a 500 416, which I've never even seen a rifle for. But somehow I ended up with this German ammunition made by Petershagen. And I guess I thought maybe I would have one built one day. That's a big round. And for the people that like ballistics, the 416, yeah, it's actually on the Hornady box. It's something like 2,415 feet per second for a 400 grain bullet. The 458 lob, which is kind of a stretched 458 Win Mag, that's 2,300 feet per second with a 500 grain bullet. So again, you know, there are all these variables, frontal area, bullet mass. Probably once you cross 400 grains, you're into the really heavy gun territory. And then frontal area can be a great advantage. It can also be a disadvantage, depending on how you think about penetration and where you're hunting. Whole bunch of variables, and I can probably talk too long about that. But again, getting back to the Rigby rifles. So, you know, what are you getting? Well, probably a rifle that belongs on a, you know, a once, twice, or 3 times in a lifetime hunt. There aren't that many special things that one can do these days in life. And so I do receive letters from people who buy Rigbys, they buy Holland and Holland, other names in the top end gun makers, Purdy, especially for shotguns. There are so many, and there are custom makers. Hartmann and Weiss in Germany, they turn out beautiful rifles. There are lots of custom gun makers actually in Germany and in Austria. The list goes on. But there is something, you know, about a Rolex watch from Switzerland and something about a Rigby rifle from England. And, you know, they're beautifully put together. People say things like they're not like the original ones. Well, they're not like the original ones because the original ones were made mostly by, you know, craftsmen with imprecise tools. There was a lot of hand filing. Some of them were made on opened up 98 actions. There are all kinds of variables, and I know that because I owned, you know, many different rifles. But the new rifle, yeah, it's not like the old rifle because it's the new rifle. It sounds silly to say. It was beautifully made, and I totally agree with people. You know, if you have the coin and are heading to Africa, a Rigby in 416, fantastic. If this looks deep, that's because it is. These are big rounds, and sometimes you need them, and you know, dangerous game and whatnot. So 4 rounds in the mag, 1 in the chamber. They also make these in 375 Holland and Holland, and I think they have a cartridge of their own, 450 Rigby, something like that. I don't know much about it. Everything about the rifle, though, is, you know, modern. The incredibly precise machining is what I always admire. I don't see file marks or anything like that. Yet they've stuck with the original principles. It's got a decent quarter rib, not too big, and barrel band sling swivel, and why not soldered on or some other system? Well, in Africa, everything falls apart. Actually, I was thinking about Africa when we started filming, because the temperature in the studio is like 100 degrees in here right now with these lights and whatnot. Of course, it doesn't have the sounds and the smells of Africa, but anyway, and the front sight is not going to fall off anytime soon. That happens in Africa too. It could be screwed on, but it's not screwed on. It's actually a separate assembly that I'm assuming is silver soldered or fastened irrevocably on this muzzle. And these guns, all of the big guns, I've never owned one that wasn't accurate. If they're inaccurate, it's because I flinch or something. But the bullets are just so big, they aren't, you know, in 100 yards or 200 yards, they're not really affected by wind or anything like that. So as for the rifle itself, yeah, they didn't go berserk with the wood. I think it's an ideal grade of the wood. I think it's like grade 5 or something like that. But you wouldn't want to go to Africa, you know, with Circassian walnut or Turkish walnut, you know, burl wood or root wood or anything like this. This is just about perfect. And this is what you would be, so slick, this is what you would be buying the Rigby for, all the quality. And then it's nice to have that in your gun case. Just like it's nice to have a Ferrari in the garage, which I don't have, or any of a number of other cars that can be meaningful to people. I know a guy that actually rebuilds muscle cars, and he loves those cars, and I'm amazed at the value of them. and not surprised actually. Everything else about the, the big Rigby is what it should be. And like I said, it may be a big action, but it runs super slick and typical safety. You're familiar with that. The trigger is excellent. It's got that rapid taper barrel, which is hard for you to see, but instead of the barrel being one, diameter, not that they ever are really just one diameter, but the barrel tapers significantly, so it's still a heavy gun, but somehow it's dynamic, and you have these wonderful express African sights, because most of the time, if you don't have a precision shot, or one of those, 1 to 4, that's usually more than sufficient for safari hunting. But if you don't have a scope, this is about the most ideal and quickest sight, assuming you have enough light, because you can shoot almost as if it's a shotgun, just completely instinctive shooting. You can point and without thinking, place that bead of the front sight in that shallow express sight and fire. Those of you that have done it know exactly what I'm talking about. And it's a magnificent thing to go hunting with something like this. And I don't think there's anything that compares with hunting in Africa, if you can get away with it. And what else? Everything. There's steel walnut. It's perfect. Every rifle should be made like this. And they also make a beautiful rifle. It's called a Highland Stalker, I think. In 275 Rigby, they call it, which is 7x57. And I believe it was originally the 7x57, and then the British gun trade took it over. And what can I say? This one has some color case hardening. They've reinforced it. The bedding is perfection, the inletting, everything that you would expect. There's a trapdoor grip cap in here that would sometimes hold extra blades for the front sight. You can get a front sight that is looks like ivory, or maybe it's phosphorus, just for night use if you're after leopard in the dark. And then a decent recoil pad. Don't want to bump anything. But again, yeah, it's an expensive rifle, but it's not a rifle that feels like it doesn't want to go hunting, like live in a vault or something. These are definitely hunting rifles, and like I said before, I hope you take a look at them. And get one day. Why not? Money comes and money goes. They never go down in value. I wish I bought half a dozen of these 20 years ago. They weren't that expensive. I think for a period of time, everybody thought African hunting was finished, and except for the ultra rich. But it's come back because so many places in Africa realize there's economic value in game. Since there are hunters willing to come to Africa, and disease and uncertainty and whatnot, but they still come. And so hunting has picked up. It's good for the African economy in those places that have sustainable game populations, and so on and so on. But let's look at these actions. So, it's kind of striking. What's the best way? I guess that we can film. You can see the Kurz action, which just means short. And it is a short action. It reminds me of that Savage 1920, or I should say the Savage 1920 is a lot like the Kurz action. I was lucky to find this rifle. Most of them have been cut up or drilled and tapped. This one still has, I believe that's the original butt plate. And, when you handle one of these, well, this one is the same. I don't know what Rigby does, or rather the German company that makes this, and I should know, but I don't. It's glass hard steel on that action. It's actually a lot like handling one of the original Rigbys, like the old ones. which is nice. And this, yeah, I mean, this is perfect. And I don't know, somebody maybe hunted but didn't shoot it much, which is often the case. Just perfect sights, right on. Not, of course, not the express style, but still completely serviceable. But what does this say? Waffenfabrik Mauser Oberndorf. So just what you would expect with the double set triggers and a fairly routine walnut stock. I mean, who would have known that this ends up becoming quite a valuable collector's item? These Kurz actions are super hard to find. If you can find one in any caliber, especially 250 Savage, you've got a really special rifle. Yeah, just wonderful petite action. So there you've seen how massive that Rigby is and needs to be. And I should mention that there are a lot of these African cartridges now, and there seems to be a trend with cartridges to make them smaller, increase pressures, and get performance out of a smaller case that fits into a smaller rifle. That's nice. I still think that the bigger cartridges are a better idea. The 416 Rigby operates at a lower pressure than some of the newer 416s. And in Africa, with the extreme heat, if you leave something on the ground or even leaning against a tree and then the sun hits it, in no time the steel's actually untouchable. It's hard to believe. And the cartridges get hot, and of course the pressure, it changes, and the gunpowder burns differently, and the primer goes off differently. So I understand why the British thought we should make the cases big with a lot of powder and try to keep the pressures low and maybe slightly more predictable. Anyway, I'm not a scientist in all this, but in terms of crude common sense, I still like the bigger cartridges. And I guess we should finish up here with this beautiful Type C. There were all kinds of sporter Mausers. Maybe I'll show you. When you buy these, you get a target from Rigby. So this was shot by David Miles, this rifle, on the 16th of April, 2015. And he shot that target at 75 yards, I think it says. And with the iron sights, which looks respectable to me. This is not 900-yard shooting. That's not the idea. And then it comes with a book. Sorry to cover up the target. And now let's take a look at this Type C. So again, I'll try to hold it without damaging anything. That's a typical, that's the Mauser you'd be most familiar with. This is in 30-06 and a scarce rifle. They made a series of sporting rifles, and this one, like the short action, says Waffenfabrik Mauser Oberndorf, A.N. Amnecker, I think. Beautiful rifle, and this one also. All three of these are glass hard and essentially work forever. And you've seen the target. And of course, the little one has the double set triggers, and no one messed with this. So last I checked, yeah, this is still good. I mean, altogether, fantastic. And yeah, Holland, they turn out a great rifle too. But somehow, for me personally, I've always liked the Rigby. There's just something about that name. And that's what it's all about, right? You can go and buy Mossberg, like that Mossberg we shot in the mountains. And we did take this out. We made a video, I think it might be on Patreon. Shoots just beautifully. But we shot Mossbergs that are just as accurate as any Rigby, like the timepieces we were talking about. So, but that's not the point. And anyway, they never go down, like I said. They actually keep going up. And these are quite scarce. All right, well, I hope that's of interest to you. Maybe we'll take a shot and have all three actions so you can see them together somehow. But I thought I've got to show you this Rigby in greater detail just because I tend to skip over things and then I go back and think, why didn't I show them this or say something? Yeah, I think I turned the other side too, but you've all seen this kind of thing before. A magnificent rifle, and just in closing, have a look at the finish on that stock. You know, they close all the pores. This is not painted, you know, with urethane or something, or sprayed with epoxy. It's filled with oil and then polished. It's a huge amount of work, that alone. And of course, flawless checkering, at least on this one. All right, well, that's enough for me. Thanks for being here on this humble channel, and we'll see you next time. Take care.